Hi again, everyone. Good morning. Why don't we get started? This is the training event on nature-based solutions. I hope many events at ADB. I hope you are in the right room. My name is Isao Endo. I'm the environment specialist at the environment group. I'm pleased to serve as an MC for this event. There are just a few housekeeping things. One is a good news. There's coffee outside and you can bring, so please feel free to go out anytime. And there are some fruits too. That's one thing. Another thing, important, bathroom. There are two bathrooms outside on the edge of the corridor. So if you need, please feel free to go. So to open this event, I would like to invite Ms. Yoko Watanabe. Yoko is the Director for Environment at the Asian Development Bank. She heads the environmental sustainability work, including nature-based solutions, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem management, and more, including air quality, circular economy, and environmental finance. Yoko has over 25 years of experience working on biodiversity and natural resources management. Prior to ADB, Yoko held key positions at global organizations such as GEF, UNDP, and the World Bank. She has rich experience in leading major environment-related initiatives, working in nearly more than 130 countries around the world. Over to you, Yoko.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Very nice to see you, and I'm really glad to see a lot of solution, and particularly on the water and urban sector. So it's an honor to have this welcome sort of remark with all of you, and thank you for the warm introduction, Isao, and organizing this event together with partners. So the first thing, this event is part of the Nature and Climate Nexus learning series that started in 2022. It's been a journey working on nature-based solutions matter as a climate bank for Asia and Pacific. What it means is that to address climate, it's not only about transport, energy, and sort of infrastructure sector, but we really see that there is a great opportunity using nature and ecosystem as a solution for climate change. So this is organized as part of the working group on nature-based solution, which is part of the environment community of practice. We just revived it earlier this year during the World Environment Day. And the working group on nature-based solution is really a cross-cutting team, which is led by Isao and other sector colleagues. And I'm really glad that we are having the first event among the working group. And so with all that introduction, first of all, I really want to thank you, the partners, the Nature Conservancy, and the Sandbrook and Eric in London is over there. And then also the Monash University, Ben, who are co-organizing this event. So this is really a wonderful partnership that we're having, bringing in all the different technical expertise together. And from ADB, I really appreciate that this is a real sort of a 1A agriculture, food, nature, and rural development sector office, and also the water and urban development sector group. In terms of our role, environmental group is a thematic group cross-cutting across different sectors, versus the sector groups do the investment program on sort of sector-specific issues. So we do corroborate very strongly between the environment and different investment and sector groups. And also, I understand the Budget and Personnel and Management System Department have been providing the general support through the sector and thematic learning program. So this is part of the learning program of this year, and we got strong support, including the budget from the BPMSD. So just a few highlight as an introduction to this seminar this week. So firstly, aligned with ADB's policy, we are really putting nature-based solutions as a core of our environmental work. We are currently working on an environmental action plan, sort of a renewed sort of commitment from ADB to really strengthen the scope and scale of the work on environment. And it has three pillars. So the world is facing the triple planetary crisis on biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change. So our response from ADB is also that three elements. So basically one, we are working on biodiversity and ecosystem management, another on pollution, particularly in air quality and circular economy. And the third one on climate change, our response from the environment side. We have a separate climate change team who is dedicating their work on adaptation and mitigation. But from our team, we are providing the support on the nature-based solution. And this time we are working on water and urban sectors in specifically, but we are working across the board with transport on the green infrastructure, energy on the renewable and others. And here on the urban and water, we have been working on wetland as well as coastal issues and many other water supply issues and others. And you will be submerged on those topics throughout the days. And what we really see as an opportunity is, both on economic and climate angle, because basically nature is the base of our economy in Asia and Pacific. 19 trillion, which is half of the GDP annually, is based on nature. So if we do not have a nature-based solution and conserving nature and sustainably using forest resources, fisheries resources, different ecosystem, we are doomed in terms of the future of Asia and Pacific. And also in terms of climate, actually, as you know, forest and ocean is a key. Sequestration is happening in these ecosystems. And then also if we address these issues well, there will be less carbon going out to the atmosphere, because the land degradation and also forest degradation is a key element of climate change. So lastly, by introducing this, I really wish you a very, very fruitful sessions. I'm sure with all of you coming from different residential missions and also different background, it will be a rich learning experience among yourselves, and also from the resource person who have rich experiences, bringing different knowledges from global experience and examples. And I hope that this will lead towards a larger investment on nature-based solutions in ADB and partners, and we can sort of work together in partnership to expand this part of work. So with that introduction, thank you very much, and good luck, and I hope to see you around. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoko, for your welcome remarks. That was really encouraging. Thank you. Now, please allow me to invite my colleague from the TNC, Ms. Brooke Atwell, for her remarks. Brooke is the Associated Director for the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Watersheds Strategy. She works to conserve watersheds around the world by developing investment programs. She also develops and executes a global strategy to mainstream nature-based solutions in the climate and water sectors, and she manages the strategy's portfolio of flagship programs. Brooke has a strong background in collaborating strategic planning, program management, and even economic and financial analysis for NBS. At this event, Brooke is kindly requested to serve as the main facilitator, She's going to deliver her remarks. She's requested to deliver her remarks, introduce her technical team, and lead the sessions this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brooke Atwal.
Thank you, Isao, and welcome everyone to this training on nature-based solutions for urban and rural resiliency. So as Isao mentioned, my name is Brooke Atwell. I am the Associate Director of the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Watershed Strategy, which is about mainstreaming nature-based solutions. So as part of that, we work to develop these trainings with large development finance institutions and multilateral development banks to help them integrate nature-based solutions into projects that are currently in their pipeline. Will you help me advance? Oh, great. Thank you. So I'm going to quickly just introduce the other trainers that will be part of this program today. So we have Eric Spilo-Rarea and Lyndon DeSalvo. Lyndon, if you could just raise your hand. Yep. And then those are both from the Nature Conservancy. And then we have Great. Then we have Ben Firmage from Monash University. They will all introduce themselves when they get up to stand and provide their presentations. So let's get right into the training overview so we don't waste any more time. All right, so the Nature Conservancy is a global conservation organization working to develop strategies that address the dual crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. So it's wonderful to hear how aligned ADB is with that mission. So we have over 6,000 staff, and although we started as a conservation organization in the United States back in the 1950s, we now actually work in 79 countries and territories around the world. That number is hot off the presses, so 3 more than the 76 you see there. And we also have over 1,000 scientists. I'll invite Ben to give a quick overview of Monash's water-sensitive cities.
Thank you, Brooke. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Firmage, representing Monash University in Australia. Just by way of very brief introduction, I've been involved in water resource management and urban infrastructure for about 30 years. Firstly, working for our national government as in policy and regulation, and then leading water planning for one of our largest urban water businesses in Melbourne at Melbourne Water. And now at Monash, where we work with colleagues around the country and around the world, continuing the work of the Cooperative Research Centre that was set up back in 2012. It brought together 124 organisations across public, private and academic sectors, including our national government, 5 state governments, 24 municipal governments, and some large and small private sector agencies as well as 4 of our leading universities, all looking at how do we get better use of nature as we plan and develop our cities and as we respond to the challenges of climate change and urbanisation. So there's a website there. I'd encourage you to go and have a look at your leisure when you've got a cup of tea and you feel like looking at something interesting. There's around 1,700 research-based outputs there, ranging from guidelines, case studies to journal articles, all looking at the different elements that you need to be able to change your city and evolve to climate change in a way that enhances its livability, its prosperity and its resilience to climate change. Over the next couple of days, we'll dive into some of that information, but it's a privilege to be here, and thank you to TNC for allowing us to participate and looking forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for your partnership. So the reason why the Nature Conservancy and Monash have decided to partner with the Asia Development Bank is because of this. The global decline in biodiversity since 1970. As you can see, both marine and terrestrial ecosystems have faced severe declines, but that lower bar there is around freshwater. Freshwater ecosystems and species richness have declined by a shocking 83% since 1970. TNC's Resilient Watershed Strategy has three main pillars of work. One is around our flagship projects. So this is really about building a diverse portfolio to show that a breadth of nature-based solutions can solve a diversity of water security challenges while reaping a diversity of co-benefits. And we try and do this in as many different socioeconomic contexts and ecosystems as possible so that we can build a broad evidence base for nature-based solutions. We elevate those living laboratories and the evidence generated in place to kind of influence our second pillar there, which is around partnerships and policy. And this is really where our partnerships with development finance institutions sit. This is also where our work with corporates sit to help them develop kind of sustainable water targets for their businesses. And this is also where a lot of our tariff reform, regulatory reforms sit. So oftentimes, in location, we're working in place to work with utilities and regulators to mobilize additional tariff funding that is that long-term sustainable funding for these watershed investment programs. And oftentimes we're working with development finance institutions on their policy loans so we can help create and generate that enabling environment for nature-based solutions. And then our third pillar, which crosses over with our pillar 2, is around our capacity development. You can think of that as tools, trainings, and technical assistance. So our trainings and technical assistance that we'll do today kind of sit and straddle between pillar 2 and pillar 3. And pillar 3 is also where our Nature for Water facility sits. That's a pseudo consultancy arm of the Nature Conservancy that provides pro bono and fee-for-service support to project developers on the ground who are looking into mainstreaming nature-based solutions for water security. And those groups who are going through clinic sessions this week will actually be eligible for 2-person days from the Nature for Water facility for extended support for the programs to carry those forward after we're finished. TNC also has a one conservancy outlook, like ADB has a one ADB outlook. So I'm going to invite my colleague Lyndon up here to speak about the TNC's urban conservation program.
Hi, everyone. Lyndon DeSalvo. I'm the Urban Conservation Program Manager with the Nature Conservancy. It's been nice meeting many of you, and I look forward to meeting many more of you over the next couple days. So I have a background in urban and environmental planning, where I work for the Nature Conservancy, both managing on the ground urban NBS projects, as well as thinking about policy and financing at a more kind of national scale in the United States. Just a bit of background on TNC's work in urban conservation. We do have colleagues across the globe who are working on issues of urban conservation, including in Asia. And really similar to how Brooke's been speaking about mainstreaming NBS, we're thinking about how do we mainstream NBS in urban environments, just as we're doing so in rural environments too. So across that, across whole entire watersheds. In the United States, we do have practitioners working in over 20 cities. It's called the Cities Network. And that's partly what I'm involved with. So it's really strong kind of learning exchange. How do we mainstream NBS, not only for water quality improvements, thinking about largely stormwater, but how do we take that equity lens and really maximize co-benefits to local communities? So you can see the organization, both as part of our urban conservation program and then more generally, have developed a series of reports. These are just a sampling of them that look at, where's there the potential to really do large investments in NBS for water, air, equity, and habitat considerations. So these are some of the reports I would point you to look further at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Lyndon. So TNC and ADB are in the process of renewing our partnership and digging deeper. We have a long history of effective collaboration between the two organizations. And in April 2021, we signed a 5-year letter of intent. And this was signed by our CEO, Jen Morris, and your ADB Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development. So there's a lot of areas that you can see under which we are collaborating together. And in the second bullet there, you'll see nature-based solutions and sustainable infrastructure. And that's what this training is really focused on today. Not to say that it won't touch on any of the other bullets, but NBS is highly integrated. And so we'll work to develop integrated solutions for your programs as part of this partnership. So today our training objectives are really to help us understand what nature-based solutions are and how they can help achieve water security objectives as well as additional co-benefits. We'll also help project teams figure out those next steps and what they would need to do to prepare for an NBS investment and to invest in NBS at scale, I should say. And then we'll also help those project teams identify approaches and tools to help them undertake those next steps. So this is our training agenda. We'll have some lecture sessions in the morning. We'll have a short coffee break. And then at the 30-minute break for office hours. So if there's any questions that we don't get to throughout the day, that would be your time to pin us down and ask us your questions that we didn't address. In the afternoon, I do want to draw people's attention, folks who are taking part in the clinic sessions. There's been a small adjustment. So after lunch, we'll come back to this room for a quick 30-minute plenary. That'll give you all an opportunity to say a few words about your specific project, so the objectives of your project and maybe some of the nature-based solutions that you're considering. That'll be about 3 to 5 minutes per project. And then we'll just give an overview of what we'll do in the afternoon in the clinic sessions, just so people understand what we're hoping to get out of this. And then each of the clinic sessions will be shortened to 1 hour today. So instead of ending at the scheduled 5:15, we'll end at 4:45. Tomorrow's clinic sessions will be the same, hour and 15, or hour and a half, I should say. All right, so just to get us started and get interaction a little bit higher. I know it's in the morning and Isao said ADB time is well in effect. So if you all could scan the QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code below, we can get started with a few survey questions. Is the Menti not working? Oh, great. Okay. Eric is the mastermind of the Menti. All good? Great. Perfect. Majority ADB staff, but it's great to see that we have some clients and counterparts calling in today. Oh, nice. We've got a pretty nice spread.
So now let's move on to the section one.
Great. As expected, majority of people are in Manila.
So we have two senior executive directors from ADB,
And we'd love to just get a sense of how familiar you are with nature-based solutions. That'll help us kind of tailor some of the commentary today.
May I ask all of you to come to the front stage in front of Leonard and Anita?
Great. Well, today, hopefully we can help you all apply them in practice or figure out how to incorporate them into your projects. And so we will tailor our commentary according to that. But if at any point you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
So I think everyone has a presentation. So I think we can start with the presentation from the presentation.
Great. I must admit, this is somewhat of a question for us because we also want to know what future resources would be most of support to y'all. So this will help us kind of tailor where we go next with ADB. All right, lots of excess sedimentation, quality around human and animal waste, lack of surface water, groundwater, but flooding far and away the greatest challenge that y'all are facing. Thank you. We'll swap over to the presentation. Great. So just today, for those of you who are calling in, we encourage you to ask any questions or make any comments at any time during the sessions. Please do use that Q&A function or raise your hand if you have any clarifying questions. We'll be monitoring the Q&A as we go through this, so hopefully can address any project-specific questions that you may have there, and then we'll hold any major questions that folks may have and raise them to the room, especially if we think it could be supportive of many people's objectives. And if anything isn't working, please do let us know. We'll do our best to fix it. So as part of the training follow-up, we do have a brief survey to see how we could make this better and supportive of your objectives in the future. And then all of the teams that are going through the clinic sessions that do express interest will receive those 2-person day equivalent from the Nature for Water facility to support your projects and moving forward to the next stage. And then we would love to hear how the projects are progressing. So please do report back on any projects that have benefited from the training, or if as a part of this training, you've identified that maybe you're working on another project that could benefit from more of that in-person support, we would love to know that as well. All right, so with that, we're going to dig right down into the meat of why you all are here. So we're going to give a brief introduction about nature-based solutions and water security so that we can all make sure that we're on the same page and speaking the same definitions. So myself, Ben, and Lyndon will be speaking to you during this presentation and kind of trading off slides. So our objectives today are to develop a shared understanding of what nature-based solutions and water security are, what they mean, understand how nature-based solutions can achieve multiple water security objectives and some co-benefits. So we'll talk a little bit about benefit stacking and what that might look like when you try to account for the breadth of nature-based solution benefits. And then we'll also talk about how to mitigate some of those potential challenges with NBS projects. So things like space, things like multiple stakeholders. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those governance and funding or financing options or considerations to keep in mind as you're developing an NBS program that can be scaled. So let's start off by water security. We use the UN water definition of water security, and that means that it's the capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to an adequate quantity and acceptable quality of water. And so things that water should be used for are things like sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, economic development, protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and of course, preserving ecosystems. So those are quite in line with ADB's 3 pillars around biodiversity, climate, and pollution. When we think about water quality and quantity challenges, we're also thinking about what factors can drive those, because that's what we want to tailor our nature-based solutions toward. We want to address the primary drivers of water quality and quantity degradation. So we kind of lump them into these 5 broad categories. Everything ranging from the demographics, so population growth, urbanization, peri-urbanization, to energy generation, so hydropower, increased energy for biofuels, storage, and even poor water management and climate change, which is probably what the majority of you all are very familiar with in your day-to-day lives. When we think about kind of conventional approaches to solving some of these water security challenges, we often think of gray infrastructure. So these technical solutions that many civil engineers, we learned in college, and then we've applied them in our professional lives. The same cannot necessarily be said of nature-based solutions. So very rarely are there these deep kind of knowledge bench and evidence base for nature-based solutions in the same way that there are around the costs and benefits of traditional built reservoirs, interbasin transfers, desal plants, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what we're really looking to change. So the drivers that we spoke about around demographics, energy demand, climate change, they're all impacting the way that the watershed functions. And so water security is impossible without ecological security. And to make ecological security a reality in many of our lives, we need to kind of change the way that we do business as usual. And that can look like protection, restoration of natural ecosystem functions, improving the way that managed lands are taken care of and stewarded. So things like agriculture or ranching best management practices. And even as we move into cities, we want to think about the way that we address how we plan and manage our cities. So Lyndon, you're going to speak a little bit about this graphic.
Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, just real quick. What I like about, in addition to the one you saw previously, is it does take into account the urban context, in addition to, kind of more upstream, often rural areas. So it's thinking about not only kind of what restoration activities and conservation you can do upstream in the watershed, but also in cities. What are some of often the hybrid approaches you can use for nature-based solutions? And those can be, rainwater harvesting. It could be efforts to reduce flooding as well. Oftentimes you need to think about, obviously, flooding in the context of the watershed. So where, what's the source of the flooding? And then, also just thinking about green infrastructure within cities and how that can help with water management in those areas. This graphic is from the IUCN. It also kind of incorporates, cities in coastal areas. How do you think about mangrove restoration or protection and some other practices that can be considered in a coastal context of a watershed? Thanks.
Thanks, Lyndon. So Lyndon is the urban expert. I'm more rural focused. And I should say that the Nature Conservancy also has a team that focuses on coastal natural climate solutions. And so there is also a partnership with ADB under that as well. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, we use the IUCN definition, as is probably commonly used throughout ADB as well, but it's actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems. And importantly, for something to be considered a nature-based solutions versus just gray or a green infrastructure, I should say, they have to provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits simultaneously. So if in a nature-based solution or green infrastructure is only providing human well-being benefits, it wouldn't necessarily be considered a nature-based solution. It has to have a biodiversity benefit as well. And so when we think about the broad categories of nature-based solutions, we kind of pull them into 4 distinct categories that IUCN uses, as well as the Oxford MBS initiative. And those are around protection, restoration, management, and creation. So some examples, many people are very familiar with protection, large areas that you often ring fenced or provide only very strictly regulated permits for maybe communities or indigenous people who have lived there traditionally to still access some of those resources. When we think about restoration, that's about improving the way that the ecosystem functions. And so often you can think about reforestation, maybe rewilding, maybe restoring wetlands. When we think about management, those are kind of our working land. So ag, branching, but even forest management for timber, or we could even do invasive species removal, or maybe fire management if you have areas that are prone to hot burns. And then when we think about creation, those are things like created wetlands. So things that weren't previously there, but you're employing because they would often help you solve some sort of water security challenge and also provide some sort of co-benefit. And oftentimes when we think about created wetlands, even though that wouldn't necessarily be the natural ecosystem that was there prior, it would often filter the water that then flows into improved ecological condition for those fish and aquatic animals that live there. So we would consider that a nature-based solution. This is a reference slide that you can go back to at a later time, so don't feel like you need to absorb it all in the moment. But this essentially takes common types of nature-based solutions under those 4 categories and shows the breadth of evidence that is available in scientific literature so that they can address some of those key water security challenges. So things like flood risk or sedimentation, nutrients, and then that green series of dots on the side there are the potential for co-benefits. So you'll note as you kind of move up towards kind of protection of intact ecosystems, restoration of ecosystems, you're likely to be able to achieve greater amount of co-benefits from those intact ecosystems versus a created wetland or a created ecosystem usually is trying to generate a specific co-benefit rather than a broad set of co-benefits. And we'll get more into some examples of what that looks like in practice. So when we talk about ecosystem services, these are often the benefits provided to people and biodiversity. So when we kind of categorize ecosystem services, they can be around provisioning, regulating, cultural, or kind of supporting. And we'll include some examples of what that means. So provisioning is the ecosystem services like water, fiber, fuel. Regulating is sort of those ecosystem services that can help ensure the quality of those provisioned services. So things like air quality or water quality. Cultural is pretty straightforward, but we would also include kind of tourism and recreation under culture. And then supporting are those things like nutrient cycling, water cycling that we don't often think about, but are incredibly important to securing kind of long-term health of many of those ecosystems. And so this is specifically about ecosystem services with examples around freshwater. I'm not going to spend a ton of time around there, but just to kind of help contextualize some of those 4 buckets, you can see that for freshwater, for supporting, it's really about nutrient cycling. So thinking about the role of floodplains and deltas in kind of pushing out those nutrients and maintaining some of those ecosystems that are especially near shore. And then when we think about provisioning, that's where your classic water security comes in and regulate. These are also examples of how nature-based solutions can improve water security and generate some of those co-benefits. When we think about stacking benefits that you can get, maybe crowd in the most amount of payers as possible. These are some of the ways that we think about doing that. So these are, I should say, by no means exhaustive, but I'm hoping that in some of these categorizations, you can recognize where your projects might sit So when we think about biodiversity conservation for nature-based solutions, we're thinking about kind of building in that diversity of habitat and landscape. We think about jobs, we're thinking about job creation to maybe restore some of those areas, or even if you think about employing local communities to engage in community-based monitoring and evaluation of some of the projects and how they are implemented. And we think about human well-being, these are often areas where you're kind of improving water quality, especially in areas where there's subsistence fishing or subsistence farming, and improving their food security. So that could look like crop switching, which you can switch from, say, tea to avocado trees, which are a high value. They're improving the amount of money that they're generating, but they're also helping to sequester carbon. And if you are really bold, you could put those carbon credits on the carbon market, as we did with our Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund. So this training focuses on the watershed scale. So you can also consider that a basin or a catchment. They're used interchangeably. And that is any surface area from which precipitation, whether that be rain or snow melt, kind of falls down into a common point. And with watersheds, you can really delineate them according to the primary benefits that you're looking to generate and your stakeholders that are involved. So it can be as big as the Mekong, but they can be as tiny as a tributary that's flowing into that. It really depends on what you are optimizing for. Also not going to focus a ton on this. Again, you can kind of come back to it, but this kind of puts those pieces, so the drivers, the ecosystem services, and the impact kind of all together. So you can see if there's a dam construction, then you may impact the quality and timing of those river flows. And that could also impact the habitat for native species and maybe recreational or commercial fisheries, et cetera, et cetera. I want to show these because they're examples of how a nature-based solutions could be stacked to achieve multiple benefits. So if you'll note, there's only 3 nature-based solutions that you're looking at pursuing on the left-hand side of that screen. But you'll note there's a ton of ecosystem services that could be generated from that one nature. Whole host of water security benefits, specifically in this case for water services. So if you just take agricultural best management practices, you can limit some of the water consumption, you can reduce soil erosion, increase soil absorption capacity and soil health, and then that could generate additional benefits like increasing the availability of water resources, especially during the dry season, and then reducing kind of tensions or maybe conflict around accessing some of those resources. When we think about sanitation services, the same can be said. If we look at created or maybe restoring wetlands, you could reduce the risk and impact of flooding. You could naturally filter some of the pollution. You could create some of that critical freshwater habitat, especially for migratory birds or maybe for juvenile fish that often breed and use wetlands as protection as they're juvenile. And then you can generate a whole host of benefits for sanitation services out of these potential ecosystems. Same could be said for benefits for farmers. So if you're looking at agricultural best management practices, you could limit their water consumption, reduce pollution from agriculture. And then of course you could improve yields because you're improving the soil quality. You're also kind of reducing some of that soil erosion. So you're losing less and less soil to the water and keeping more of it there, some of that more nutrient rich soil for farming, which can generate higher yields. So nature-based solutions are often combined with gray infrastructure to address some of these water security challenges. And they can either be incorporated as sort of an add-on to existing gray infrastructure, or they can be intentionally designed with it. And we'll give some examples. But generally, as we move from left to right on that diagram below, from green only to green or gray, you'll achieve greater water security co-benefits and maybe improve the resiliency or I should say cost effectiveness of some of those gray infrastructure assets. So These are two examples of where nature-based solutions have been used as an add-on. So one was in France, where there was an urban area in the northeast of France, and they had a vegetated discharge zone downstream by the wastewater treatment plant that was managed by Veolia. Veolia also turned this into a park, but it was also a critical biodiversity area for waterfowl that would come and nest there. And it also filtered their water, reduced their water treatment costs, and improved kind of nature and access to green space for the local community. And then in China, they rehabilitated some wetlands to treat industrial wastewater. So this was done by Sinopec Group, and the local population and authorities were expressing concerns about the impact of their plant on the environment. So as a result, Veolia, through a contract with Sinopec, managed kind of the reuse of these industrial effluents and restored the ecosystem of wetlands that were pre-existing around there, while also kind of taking advantage of the beauty to also increase access to green space by the local communities. This is an example of where they did an integrated planning. So in New York City, in the United States, they were looking at upgrading their water treatment plant in the city, which would have cost billions and billions and billions of dollars. And it was quite an intense undertaking. As you know, New York City is quite famous for its water. It's why they say their pizza and their bagels taste so good. I'm not so sure about that, but who knows? And so what they did is they decided to invest upstream in the Catskills, and that's where their water comes from. It filters all the way down to New York City from the Catskills. So they invested in large scale restoration and protection of that area. And that reduced the cost of water treatment by millions of dollars each year. And there was a there was kind of like a look back on the return on investment of that protection. And we'd be happy to share the scientific paper of the amount of protection and of the cost that it takes to maintain and manage that. It saved the city of New York over $100 million over that 20-year period. So investing in NBS for nutrient and erosion control actually significantly reduces the water treatment costs for more than 2,000 cities globally. So we looked at how we could replicate what happened in New York around the world. Are there other cities that could benefit from that same model? And our science says yes. In fact, 4 out of 5 large cities could see a positive return on investment from investing in nature-based solutions. And 1 out of 6 of those cities could see a positive investment. They could pay for that nature-based solutions through savings in water treatment costs alone. So that's not monetizing any of the other potential co-benefits that would come out of that nature-based solutions. It's just savings in water treatment costs directed towards that NBS. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of opportunity in Asia and Asia Pacific. In fact, the majority of black dots on that map fall in Asia and Asia Pacific. Give it over to Ben to talk about more about this hybrid urban NBS.
Thanks, Brooke. So Brooke has already really highlighted well the important role that cities play in a broader catchment. It's not cities and the catchments interconnected. They are increasingly having an impact on their catchment, particularly in terms of downstream impacts, but they're also drawing more resources in. So, but as well as thinking about the city in the broader catchment, we can also look inside the city so that it can do its bit, and nature can play a really key role in that as well. And it does it in a number of ways. And the good news is that a lot of the infrastructure that our cities will need, 3/4 in fact, is not yet built. So we have a real opportunity now to help our cities evolve in a way that harnesses the power of nature and does it in a way so it enhances our environmental outcomes, but also makes our cities livable and more healthy. And I'm happy to share some evidence, some scientific evidence to support that. And it does it in a number of ways. And the different ecosystem services that Brooke was talking about that can be done at a broader catchment scale can be done at a city scale. It can be done at a precinct within that city scale, and it can even be done at an individual building scale. And what we'll talk about over the next couple of days is how do we identify the right mix of the different types of ecosystem services, filtration, retention, shading to improve urban cooling. How do we get that right combination of services for our particular city because wherever I go in the world, people say that might work in Australia, but my city's different, and they're right. And so how do we find combinations of NBS in that particular city that respect the history, that help unlock future opportunity and respond to the nature that's already there, the infrastructure that's already there, and ensure an improved and fairer outcome for the people that live there now and in the future. So we have a significant opportunity, and some of the examples that I'll show include things like going from single-purpose infrastructure to multi-purpose infrastructure, from single corridors for transport to multifunctional corridors, for parks that not only provide a great place to spend your family, but do important work in terms of water treatment, cooling the city, protection against flood, those sorts, and also improving the environmental outcomes. And so we have a great opportunity, but we also have a really significant imperative. There's a quote there saying that the way that our cities evolve will have a fundamental impact on our health, wealth, and well-being into the future. 70% of our populations will live in cities, but the World Bank are also saying that a lot of the growth of that cities will happen in the fringes, where the climate impacts are going to be the most significant and where the people that are living there have the least capacity to adapt. So it's really important that we unlock the power of nature so that our cities evolve in a way that improves our resilience and also helps bridge the financing and funding gap we've got. We have seen many reports that show there is a significant difference between the amount of funds that are available for the infrastructure that we need and what it would cost through a traditional approach. So over the coming days, we'll talk about how do we get better combinations of nature, culture, and conventional structure so that we can help bridge that financing gap, help make the most of the nature that is there already, and bring those together in a way that respects the community's past, but also helps create the future that they're looking for. Thank you, Brooke.
Great. So now that we all have kind of a common understanding of nature-based solutions and the potential for them, let's talk a little bit about maybe the governance and funding considerations that we should be keeping in mind when we kind of scale these programs up. So as we all are probably aware, because you all work in the investment sector, investments in NBS actually remain quite small compared to traditional water sector investments in what we would call gray infrastructure. That really large bar that you see there is what is spent per year on traditional gray infrastructure investments. And that very barely imperceptible bar at the very, very bottom is what we would see as green infrastructure or nature-based solutions investment. And so there's a huge opportunity, even reorienting just 1% of that scary green bar towards nature-based solutions could actually eclipse all philanthropic spending on conservation combined. So not even philanthropic spending on freshwater or nature-based solutions, all philanthropic spending on conservation combined. It's a huge opportunity, and you all play an incredible role in mobilizing more of that funding for nature-based solutions. So one of the things that we talk about in NBS is about how we could leverage co-benefits to develop solutions that have multi-criteria or multi-benefits for people. You know, the governments that you work for, they're under pretty tight budgets. They don't have a lot of wiggle room for add-ons and additionalities and new projects. And so what we try to do is develop a portfolio of nature-based solutions that can hit as many of their development objectives as possible, as cost effectively as possible. The opportunity that we have around co-benefits, however, is that we could also attract multiple potential revenue streams. And that is particularly important when you think about kind of the maintenance, the OpEx of these nature-based solutions, which can often carry a significant cost that governments should be aware of when they start to embark on this. And so when we think about these possible revenue streams, it could range everything from kind of commercial revenue and public subsidies to environmental tariffs or even visitor fees and ecotourism, as has been particularly effective in Costa Rica. When we think about kind of the mechanism for which we can mobilize funding, especially from some of those downstream beneficiaries upstream in the watershed where they are really producing many of those ecosystem services that they benefit from. We often think of watershed investment programs. Those are things like water funds, which are really leveraging the power of nature-based solutions to crowd in multiple funders around collective action, of which development finance institutions are often some of the first injectors of capital into those collective action mechanisms. It's co-governed, and then the funding is then provided to upstream actors to implement those nature-based solutions, and co-monitored. So impact reporting is coordinated among all stakeholders who have a stake in the future of the basin. We look at that in this sort of project development lifecycle, which very closely mirrors the development finance institution lifecycle, where we're moving all the way from pre-feasibility, which is just, is there opportunity? Is there potential for nature-based solutions? When you move to feasibility, that really gets more in-depth. That's where we do an in-depth modeling exercise of the basin to say, where should nature-based solutions be implemented, at what locations in the basin, who will benefit when they are implemented, when will those benefits accrue, and what is the return on those benefits. We then move into design, which looks at operationalizing all of that. So who are the primary decision makers? How will money be spent and deployed into the basin? What are the priority areas for first investment? How will reporting and monitoring work? And we work with programs to develop those internal systems to make that reporting pretty seamless and smooth. And we'll talk through how we do that with specific examples as we move through. And then execution is really about checking in. Are we implementing at the cadence we said we would? Are we achieving the objectives that we said we would? If not, how do we adaptively manage to change the way that nature-based solutions are maybe prioritized or deployed in the basin? We support over 50 watershed investment programs operating on every continent around the world at the Nature Conservancy. And we are expanding that portfolio every day through the Nature for Water facility, which is that pro bono fee-for-service consultancy arm of TNC. So throughout our time, we'll touch on some of these programs so you can see how they are actually operationalizing nature-based solutions at scale, and how they're moving from those pilot projects that often are associated with NBS to kind of long-term functioning mature programs that are generating their own funding and financing year after year and no longer need additional investment from stakeholders to achieve their objectives. So I'm going to stop here. Are there any questions around nature-based solutions, water security, some of those ecosystem services we talked about, maybe integration? I'll pause. Yeah. Oh, hold on. I think we're going to give a mic so the online participants can hear you.
My name is Mamun. I'm from Bangladesh Restoration Mission, ADB. I have a simple, it's not a question specifically. I mean, the Bangladesh is a country where we have 160 million people with a very small land, where people are still fighting with the basic needs, the water, sanitation, road, infrastructures. So, and the ADB in Bangladesh, yes, we provide the basic infrastructure services like the road and drainage. Definitely we have the nature-based solutions, but my question is that when people are still fighting with the basic services, and how do you incorporate nature-based solution? Is it costly? Is it people have enough capacity to do it? And what about the operation and the maintenance of it? So thank you.
Yeah, so the thing about nature, I can give like a general overview, but there are a lot of ways that people have, I should say, developed bespoke solutions for their particular context. So we are often working in developing areas where basic needs are not being met, and nature-based solutions can be a portion of that solution, but it's not going to be the whole of that solution. So we often work hand in hand with, say, WASH partners who are developing those, two house connections to make sure that when they do build that pipe, there will be water flowing into that pipe into perpetuity, because we've kind of developed nature-based solutions portfolio to safeguard the water quality and quantity to provide those services. I will say in Nairobi, where we work a lot with smallholder farmers, to kind of improve their agricultural best management practices. We provide subsidized resources for them and free training. And in Kenya, what they've done is they've taken advantage of the existing agricultural extension services that are available. And the government provides that support kind of pro bono to the water fund. And we kind of do hand-in-hand community development trainings across the watershed to get farmers to sign up to the program. And so we help them institute things like planting of napier grasses, terracing, distributed water storage, so they have something that they can use to grow crops in the dry season. Crop switching, they are the water fund that's instituted a ton of agroforestry into their portfolio. And so they've been able to generate long-term funding for the program by putting those carbon markets generated from that agroforestry onto the market with a buyer in the Netherlands. And so there's ways that we've kind of incorporated and tailored local solutions to meet the priority of local communities. And oftentimes in that feasibility stage, we'll have started it with a long list of nature-based solutions, but we do the on-the-ground legwork to go to the community and say, are you interested in any of these? Are there any of these that are, no-go, non-starters? And we take those out from the list, because then you're going to generate a feasibility analysis around an ag BMP that they're not interested in. And then kind of devalues the feasibility analysis itself. So there's a lot of ways that we've kind of tailored solutions to meet the local context. And we'll give a lot of examples of how that can be done. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Victor Tomilba, ADB consultant. I would just like to build on this discussion. You had a very interesting slide, slide 40, and that talks about stacking of benefits. So first, I was wondering if you can use this to kind of prioritize type of NBS and the type of benefits that you want. Now, if you look at the right side, benefits for sanitation, you can prioritize your benefits, right? But then maybe you were talking about in Bangladesh situation is you also have to prioritize the social aspect. So maybe you can stack it according to the benefits that you need and frame it like this one. How can you incorporate nature-based solutions that have services that meets the priorities of your communities?
Yeah. Exactly. So sometimes, oftentimes when we enter these conversations, we start by the benefits that you want to see and some of those drivers that are impacting the realization of those benefits. And then that would include, your sanitation services. It could include community needs. It could include needs for biodiversity. Maybe you have a donor who's particularly interested in job creation or gender empowerment and parity. And so you kind of start with this long list of potential benefits that you're interested in, and then you start mapping those drivers that are impacting that. And then you come up with a long list of nature-based solutions, and you start doing this crazy mapping exercise where you connect all of them with all the lines to figure out which ones are attached to the most benefits, which ones are attached to the most ecosystem services that you're interested in. And then you can start narrowing down your list of nature-based solutions according to those that could impact it most. And then once you have sort of that long list, then you do the intensive modeling, which will allow you to say where in the basin should which NBS be implemented. And you run that model and scenario multiple times to most ideal cost-effective solution. And then you think about your benefits, and you can generate the indicators, obviously, from those mapping and analyses to say, okay, well, if we are looking at farmers and improving the output for their to improve economic generation for them, these nature-based solutions will do that, and they will reduce sediments flowing into the water supply system, which is something that the utility cares about downstream. So that's sort of how we kind of think about stacking those multiple benefits. Does that answer your question, Victor? Okay. Any other? Yes.
My name is Xiao Yan from the PRC Resolution of ADB. I just want to add to the discussion, the question Oma just had. Actually, my understanding, the nature-based solutions is not new. The people have been practicing it for many, many years. Many ancient civilizations have been practicing this kind of solution, but just not branded as a name, as nature-based solution. For example, in China, I know that integrated water resources management, like in Dujiangyan in Sichuan province, it's listed under the UN Cultural Heritage. It's a very good example. If you are interested, you can come to me too. I can give you. And also many other civilizations. I know that some countries in Central Asia, even in Bangladesh, maybe, they are using, like, for example, the rainwater harvesting. I think that's a very typical example for irrigation that Asian people have been practicing. And also some like groundwater channel for the irrigation in the dry area. That's also another good example. So it's not like you have to be a developed country, you have a lot of money, and then you use nature-based solution. In the past, in ancient times, people have no, in such a poor condition, but they are also practicing it. So I think NBS is not, it can be very cost effective and generating multiple benefits, including the ecological benefits. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Many of the communities and indigenous tribes that we work with will say, well, we've been doing this for generations and centuries, and we're really the ones that have just decided to package it in something that is, marketable to civil engineers, investors, project developers, et cetera, et cetera. But oftentimes when we work with indigenous people and local communities, they have insights that we do not. And so they are often the ones who are providing some information around like costs associated with some of those nature-based solutions, ways that we can make the operation more effective to reduce some of those programmatic costs that kind of sit at the center of some of these watershed investment programs. And they're also really great at helping us kind of gut check what the model says. So, if you project back 10 years and you use that to project forward 20 years, they would be able to say, actually, your analysis says that it's forested right here, but we know there's illegal mining right here. So it's not forested. That the watershed investment program functions. I 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with what our colleague from China said. I mean, this is part of our operation for many years, actually.
Yeah.
But then somehow we have just started using this term, nature-based solutions. So if we dig into our operations, ADB funded, maybe, I think many of those projects are already using so-called nature-based solutions. So that's my comment. But I think the application of this concept into our real world operation is always not easy. I mean, we are trying to have this kind of project in many countries, and they are not in the US, they are not in Europe, and then they are learning, still trying to catch up with any of those countries. So I think we need to have this kind of session with ADB staff as well as our client, because in a way it's great, but then we also need to keep on inviting our colleagues, and then this could be an important session. I think it's part of our team building exercise, not just on the ADB side, but we need to do it together with our client. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to learning more about the application of this concept, because we have talked about the theory. So that is more important equally important to us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will say TNC hosted a session at World Water Week, and Lance Gore from ADB spoke on the panel, and he said the exact same thing around how do you bring clients along and kind of generate that buy-in and interest and demand so they are asking for nature-based solutions, and it's less of a push and it's more of a supply. Yeah. 5 minutes, did you say?
So we have 5 minutes. Also, we have a question from Zoom, which is how do you arbitrate between the benefits for humans and for nature for NBS?
Yeah. Oftentimes they are kind of false dual choice between people and nature. People cannot survive without nature. And oftentimes we can find solutions between the two that generate opportunities for both of them. In all of the examples that you'll hear from our colleagues this week, it's all talking about that joint human nature benefit. And so really you can optimize between the two. Yeah, sometimes there's always trade-offs that need to be made, and that's a conversation that you need to have with your stakeholders. But ultimately there's more in common between the two than there is a difference. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, good morning. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Good to be here. Chingai Jaime with the Environment Group. My question is around the scaling up. You talk about that, how we're trying to scale up nature-based solutions now. And I just wanted to clarify, so I'm imagining, maybe this is a question specific to urban areas, I don't know, but if you have like a more dense, like a densely populated space that requires so many services, because you talk about ecosystem services, right? And nature-based solutions help enhance those ecosystem services. But when you say you're scaling up, do you mean that you're, let's say, hoping more cities consider nature-based solutions? Or are you saying like in one city, services can be provided only by nature-based solutions? Or is that just not, because of the carrying capacity of nature, that's just not possible for our cities and it still has to work with gray solutions, as an example?
Yeah, so when we talk about scale, it's kind of like a both and. So when TNC talks about scale, of course, we'd love to have multiple cities and basins around the world employing nature-based solutions. However, there is often I would say a perception of nature-based solutions that they are really difficult to implement at a large scale geographically within a particular basin. So people often talk about, nature-based solutions are really good for a pilot, but we've been unable to move from that pilot to multiple locations within the basin. So they start with one community around generating agricultural best management practices, but it's difficult to expand that to the 270,000 farmers that are in that basin. And so that's what we mean in this particular instance around scaling a particular project, because nature-based solutions needs that scale in order to generate the level of co-benefits and ecosystem services that you are expecting. But Ben or Lyndon, do you have anything you want to say from the urban perspective?
And maybe we can, like water, I'm just thinking out loud here, water quality as an example. Like, are you, for instance, maybe you're using the ecosystem services of wetlands for filtration? I don't know.
Yeah.
But is that possible? Then can you do that then at scale for an urban city with X millions of people requiring X water, X amount of water that's clean? I guess that's where I'm like trying to think, is this like feasible?
Yeah, I would say I'll let the urban folks speak, but oftentimes when we're applying NBS, especially in an urban context, it's a both and. It's a green and gray solution together, because the green helps the gray function more cost effectively or improve the resilience of that asset. But I'll let Ben and Lyndon respond from the urban perspective.
Thanks, Brooke. So we'll see you after lunch and we'll see you tomorrow, because that is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to say that it's not a either or choice. It's how do we get the best of both in a way that is appropriate for that particular place. And when we talk about it, we talk about scaling up, scaling out, and scaling deep. So how do we scale up so that you've got everyone in the organization from the bottom to the top, you know, from the person who's doing the maintenance to the CEO and the board, all understanding and making their unique contribution to the implementation and sustaining it over time? How do you scale it out so that you start from your excellent pilot and adapt it and apply it to other places? And how do you continue to learn so that you scale deep, you understand how nature-based solutions can work with your existing infrastructure in a way that is respectful of the current community and taps the knowledge of the past, so that you constantly learn? Because it's not like just plugging in a pump and away you go. It's an open system. The plants are different and the way they work will be unique to each individual place. And just to come back to Mamoun's comment earlier, one of the examples that we'll talk about in our clinic this afternoon is looking at informal settlements on the fringe of large cities in Indonesia and Fiji, in the Revitalising Informal Settlements and Their Environments project. That is an area where people do not have basic human needs. They have some real issues with flooding and the impact that it's having on the health, particularly their kids. So we'll look at how nature-based solutions can add value to a place where it will take a generation for the centralised pipes, the centralised water and the centralised sanitation to get to this place, and where the density of population is too great and WASH is not working, and traditional solutions like septic tanks are not being implemented and maintained and not working. So there are some practical examples there where we can show we can get technology and nature working well together in a way that improves the basic human needs of these people. And the point around stacking is fantastic. I guess my question is, who does the stacking? You know, and how to involve the people that will live with these assets long after the international team has gone, and how do we build them in a way that they have a strong connection to, they are involved in the development and delivery, and so that they have the economic and the financial capacity to be able to maintain them into the future. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly, Ben, a great job kind of in some of that framing, but just a primer for tomorrow. I'll be presenting on some US case studies and really kind of diving a little bit deeper on Philadelphia, where I live, and it is a citywide program that I'll be presenting. You know, it's 10 years on, so it's still kind of in that implementation phase in terms of like, can you achieve success at a citywide scale? But it's novel in that it is looking at, you know, how to do kind of water quality investments that prioritize green approaches rather than gray. It does have that hybrid solution, but it's really leaning heavily on the green approach. And I'll also just give a primer tomorrow for the session that Ben and Eric will be doing on ROI and kind of benefit cost analysis, and really how you think about it as multifunctional infrastructure, and making sure that, you know, these nature-based solutions approaches are really being fully valued in the same way that gray infrastructure kind of benefit cost analysis is done, and that these investments can actually, you know, they actually, just because it's plants and vegetation, they can actually perform better over time versus gray infrastructure approaches, which immediately, you know, the value starts to deteriorate. So it's not only that, but it's also, you know, if it's a hybrid approach, can it extend the life of some of those gray infrastructure assets too? And that needs to be considered in the analysis.
Great. Oh, Isa.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Great discussion. I'm really encouraged. I have a request to our colleagues, project officers. I would like to know what are the biggest challenges you have to scale investment in NBS, and how can we help from technical as well as financial perspectives? You may have immediate responses, or you can just tell us during this training session. Thank you.
I think it's a $1 million question, but there are many challenges that we have in the nature-based solution application to our day-to-day operations. I think maybe some of those, maybe the most common one is, ADB urban specialists like myself, we are convinced to use this kind of approach, but then the urban setting is always competitive. This limited space is not available for us, but this is available for something else according to the priority of the mayor or maybe the municipal services. So when we go and talk to them, hey, listen, let's do this nature-based solution. And then not necessarily the priority for a mayor or leadership of the city. And they said that, yeah, let's just go with the traditional approach, gray infrastructure investment that we are talking about. So that's one way to look at it. But within ADB also, we do have many conditions attached. I think we are very happy to have two safeguard colleagues. They are very good because they understand the importance of these nature-based solutions. But in some cases, when we have this additional investment, I don't want to say the punishment, but when we want to have some innovative approaches, rather than being rewarded to have this additional component, but then we are required to do additional assessment and requirements of the safeguard compliance. Even though this is going to significantly improve the overall environment of the cities through the improved access to green space, among others. So this is, I think we can talk this kind of issue as a group and as to how we can promote as one team. So that's maybe two immediate thinking I can answer to your questions. Thank you.
No, I mean, what my colleague said is rightly said, just to compliment him, basically the mindset of the government to go for the nature-based solutions, and also the capacity to look into it in a integrated and holistic approach that is completely missing. And if I give an example of Bangladesh, when you prepare projects, the reference document, like the policy documents, whatever we have in the government, you hardly find the word in the nature-based solutions. So this is basically at the top level. And the bottom level, if I say that at the community level, I mean, the question I initially asked to you, like 25 years before in Bangladesh, in the villages, the practices we had, I should consider all the nature-based solutions. Like we have rainwater harvestings. We have the pitchers method to decontaminate the water. We have the ponds and filter. But the development partners like the UNs, so they come up with the awareness building and community mobilizations, and they said that, okay, the groundwater could be the safest water, go for the deep tube. In Bangladesh, this happens. So there is a mass deep tube, was there hand tube. And after sometimes we said that, okay, there is some arsenic, some iron and heavy materials. Now the groundwater is not considered as sustainable water sources. And we are again going for the community mobilizations, go for the surface water treatment. So we are again going back. So it's like 25 years history. So if you see in a society, in enough mature society, if the development partners, if the NGOs, IUCNs, they come up 25 years before what they have said, now they're saying exactly the opposite. You see the mindset up. So how we are going to basically change this mindset up in Bangladesh? So this is the key challenges for Bangladesh, I'm saying, the mindset up. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I encourage you all to continue to think through Isau's question. We would also like to know what your biggest challenges and barriers are. We are now going to take a short, I believe, 15-minute coffee break. So please refuel, come back ready to go. And then we'll dig into some really rapid NBS case studies right after this. So be prepared.
Thank you so much. So at first, because we couldn't find the videos, so John kept us okay because we had so much. But now we good. So now we can find the video and we can share the video. ADB's website. If you can. Yeah, maybe we're not. We didn't know it was. We just know it was in China. Then. And but this will really, really help. You can call me Ching. And you're here, based in headquarters. And back. Yes, CCRE is the position. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. That was louder than I was expecting. Is there anyone still outside? Final call. Great, we've got the thumbs up. Are we good on the Zoom? Yep. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for your time and for the session this morning. Big thanks to Brooke and Ben and Lyndon for their time. We're going to spend the rest of the time this morning up until noon talking about some practical examples. We've got a great theoretical underpinning now on some of the main concepts of NBS. We want to give you some rapid fire case studies of how NBS has touched down in practice in different parts of the world. We had some great discussions earlier in the Q&A section. One of those points was, how might this work in different countries at different scales? We can answer some of those questions with the case studies we'll rush through today. Tomorrow morning, we'll go through a smaller number of case studies in more depth. The idea of these case studies is just to give you kind of high-level examples to really jog some of the thinking, particularly in advance of the clinic sessions this afternoon. So I'm Eric Sparrow-Larrea. I'm the person you haven't heard from yet today. I'm originally Spanish. My surname there, Larrea, that means pasture in Basque, which is a very niche language. I have an economics background. I started working in the City of London. I've been working for TNC for the past 3 years or so, helping establish watershed-based NBS programs in different parts of the world. I'll be the main presenter, and we'll have Ben and Lyndon come in on some of the case studies. So we've got about an hour and 15 minutes, give or take. We'll run through 6 very quick case. Keep these case studies in mind for that Q&A. We'll have a kind of voting system for which case study you found most exciting. And then we'll go over some key considerations for how to do nature-based solutions programs at scale. This is another thing which came up this morning about how do you scale up beyond pilot stage. There are some really important concepts we can think about as we're planning to do that. And then we'll have a longer Q&A section at the end. Now we're going to trial a question and upvoting system in Menti. So if you go to menti.com and enter that code, you have an opportunity there to submit your questions. At the end of the key consideration section, we will pause and you'll be able to see each other's questions and upvote the most important ones. The reason we're doing this is so that the people online and the people in the room can have the same list of questions. If we have some sort of technical difficulty, we'll go back to using mics the standard way. But please go through Menti and submit your questions on there. That way also you don't have to remember your question throughout the whole presentation. So our first slide here is our 6 NBS programs are very different, and we've selected one from each quadrant or each section of the globe. So we've got Washington, Norfolk, Kunshan in China, Australia, Kruger, which is in South Africa, and Camboriú in Brazil. And each of these programs is very different. In Washington, we're talking about urban flooding, primarily. Lyndon will speak to us about that example. In Norfolk, primarily non-point source pollution related to some offset schemes the government has for new construction. Kunshan urban parks, Ben will talk to us there. Australia, drought and climate adaptation. Kruger to canyons is primarily invasive species control for water supply and some agricultural ranching practices, and Camboriú forest protection. So these are 6 very different examples addressing different problems using nature in different ways. So the first example here we have is Camboriú. This is in southern Brazil, just east of Paraguay. The main organization there involved is the Municipal Water and Sanitation Department, and they have 2 main challenges. One is sediment loading, which is costing them a lot of in sludge management and pumping, and dry season water availability. So despite having a lot of rain in the rainy season, in the dry season, there's not enough flow coming through. So there's some key considerations there. So in Camboriú, the team there identified a few priority interventions. So reforestation in those upstream areas, riparian buffers and livestock exclusion. So that's thinking about the riparian corridor. How do you manage that area? And conserving the forests which already exist. A question to the room and to the Zoom: how might we prioritize where to deliver these activities? So we care about sediment and we care about water quantity. We have some activities there. How might we think about prioritizing? There's no wrong answers. Cost. Ben, the economist in the room says cost. Correct. Cost benefits, let's say. So the first thing we did here was map out sediment discharge in different parts of the basin. So we're seeing there on the left a map of the basin in different colors. The darker colors are where most sediment is being exported, and that has to do with various things like gradient, soil type, vegetation cover, agricultural land use as well. And based on this mapping, we're able to identify different priority areas in the catchment to conserve existing forest, that's green, and restore forest where there used to be forest, that's pink. So this is an example where we were able to use science spatially to identify specifically where in the catchment should we do these things based on those benefits that we care about. Okay, so now we know what our benefits are. How do we justify funding? How do we convince the government? How do we convince our client to put money into this kind of program? So another question, someone other than Ben, how would you try and identify, or how would you try and justify a kind of a program like this? We've got benefits and return on investment on the back. That is the correct answer. Thank you. So here we have a chart on the right where those red bars are our different costs associated with our program. So we have the actual nature-based solutions investments, we have management of the program, some land rental and other exercises. So those are our costs. And on the right, we have our benefits. So that's avoided water loss in the dry season, avoided chemical use. Those are the flocculants to deal with the sedimentation challenge we mentioned before. And what we identified here is that reductions in sediment treatment cost and water losses just to the water utility justify 80% of the original investment. So we're talking about stacking beneficiaries. Just one beneficiary in this case, which is the municipal water utility, the benefits are equivalent to 80% of the cost. So you don't need to go too much further to get to an ROI above 1. After that funding or cost benefit analysis, you can then plan out, okay, what am I going to do in which years? What do I need to do before other things? What's my long-term maintenance looking like? And this is a kind of funding outflow exercise of that analysis. There we have the water utility, EMASA, kind of in the middle of the program. Water users fund the water utility with water tariffs, which is a model I'm sure you're familiar with. The state regulator is responsible for approving the budgets of EMASA, and they're also the organization which allows EMASA to include nature-based solutions in its tariff scheme. So the key involvement here of the regulator as a kind of approver and allower of this activity to happen. There's a board made up of various external organizations who are hydrological modelers, local community leaders, and others who are involved in working with the utility and also delivering some of those activities. That's a kind of green arrow with the money icon. The existence of those external partners can motivate and allow for additional funding to flow in. So there are some funding flows which can't go through municipal water supply, for example, and maybe there are different organizations in the kind of collaborative who can access that funding. And many different organizations kind of represented in each of those cases. We're jumping over to Norfolk in the UK now. So you can see the map on the right there, that's Norfolk in orange. In East Anglia. Key beneficiaries here are Anglian Water, which is the water utility, Norfolk Wildlife Trust, this is a big birding area, lots of wetlands, and Norfolk County Council, so a big role here for regional government particularly. The challenges there around low flows again, and water quality related to non-point source pollution from agricultural activities, and various metrics of success. A key co-benefit here is unlocked housing. So the regulator in Norfolk has enforced offsetting essentially for new development and restoring nature as a way to unlock additional development in some of these urban areas. So here we have a map. We see that red line kind of going through the Wensum, that is a chalk stream. Norfolk has 80 or 90% of the chalk streams globally. So this is a very unique ecosystem. As boring as Norfolk can look sometimes, there's some really exciting stuff going on if you look down. So we have some heritage farmland there, these chalk rivers I noted earlier, and these Broads wetlands. And those red areas you can see on the right-hand side, those are the outlets of these streams into the sea. So we have three main water challenges in Norfolk. We have low flows and water availability, water quality, I mentioned before, and biodiversity loss. So what do we want to achieve to address these challenges? So we think about water flows, that sponge functioning of the landscape. So how can we change or adapt the landscape so it's retaining more of that water in wet seasons and then letting it out in dry seasons, and increasing groundwater infiltration. We have a lot of groundwater use here as well. Water quality challenges, that's sediment and nutrient discharge from the land, and biodiversity, habitat creation, and conserving soils. All of the really important animals we can't see that are in the soil, really important too. And which different NBS can we use to actually address those challenges? So starting on the left there, runoff attenuation, things like weirs, for example, or wet or restored wetlands can, get on the slides. Things like weirs and attenuation features like that can slow flow and store water. We have different soil management practices we can deliver as well, working with the farmers there. Again, working with farmers, land use change, and those riparian corridors we touched on also in the Brazil example. Water, as it goes into the riparian corridor, flows over the farms through these riparian areas and into the river. So different activities you can do within the 20 to 30 meters on either side of the river can have a really important impact. And again, land use change and soil management practices on the right. And here we have some pictures of different practices there that have been delivered. So runoff attenuation, that water kind of collects in that space. Riparian zone restoration, so you can kind of see there farmland to the left, some riparian corridor revegetation. The water that's running over that farm is filtered and slowed as it enters the riparian area. And our economic analysis in Norfolk was 6.7 to 1. I won't run through all of the numbers here, but you can see how big some of them are. There was a clear economic case in Norfolk, which has motivated lots of additional funding from the water utility and from local government, which we mentioned on the previous slide, and other organizations, including private sector as well. So we have this Norfolk Water Fund with several different core partners. You mentioned before the council, Anglian Water, TNC is involved, WWF and others. There are three main types of funding flowing in here. We have repayable finance from different financiers. That's our kind of top bucket there. We have some standard NBS funders with no repayment. Some of that funding is outcome based. So X pounds going into the program after a certain metric is achieved, or X pounds per Y of sediment reduction, for example. And that can be a low risk way for a funder to sign up to something which is going to deliver them benefits over the long term. Then we have these ecosystem services beneficiaries. We've called them at the bottom, for example, carbon credits was brought up earlier. That's another kind of type of funding which is coming through. Norfolk Water Fund, their contracts implementers, that might be people doing tree planting or tree restoration, or it might be direct payments for ecosystem services structures to the actual farmers themselves in order to incentivize them to do no-till planting, for example, or cover cropping in some of those areas. Okay, my final example here, and then I'll hand over to Lyndon for Washington. So we're talking now about the Kruger to Canyons biosphere region. This is in northeastern South Africa. There's a big dam there, whose name I won't try to pronounce, but that is a key water supply for the local areas, mining and agricultural users. This isn't far from Johannesburg, this area. The key challenges including invasive plants. There are many eucalyptus trees there, which are destroying the local ecosystem and changing the way that water infiltrates and flows over the land. We also have unsustainable grazing practices and mining in some of these riparian areas, which is discharging lots of nasty things into the stream. So we have here a map on the left-hand side of different vegetation types and protected areas. An interesting aspect here is that some of these protected areas, which are those kind of green zones, border some of the priority areas, which are these diagonally slashed zones. So we were talking earlier about protection as one of the key types of NBS. Now you might protect an area, but what happens in the area next to the area you've protected? So in the area next to the protected area, you might be thinking about grazing management. So within those protected areas, there aren't people doing grazing, but in those fringe zones, how can we improve the way grazing is done? But within those protected areas, the map on the right, there are these pine and eucalyptus invasions. So what's happened is the government has protected an area and said, okay, this area is fine now. Meanwhile, all these invasive alien plants are coming in and causing real problems. So we talked before about protection and restoration on that slide and some other options. Now, some of these NBS can happen at the same time. Protecting an area isn't always the end of the story. And that's been a really key focus for this program in Kruger to Canyons. So I've got another question for the group here. So this chart shows the dam level in that dam in Kruger. And between 2015 and 2018-19, there was a real dip in dam supply. Storage in that dam. What might have been the impacts of that lack of water? Yes. So what we were allowed to do, what we did then with our analysis was forecast out future rain supply into that dam. So we could say, okay, in absence of restoring these upstream areas, of controlling those invasive plants, these are our red line. So we predict based on climate modeling of rainfall, based on snow melt, based on spread of these invasive plants, what will happen to the dam level over the next 30 years or 40 years, which is that red line there. So we can say in 2016, you reached this critically low level. It meant you couldn't supply water to your mines, you couldn't supply water to your agriculture. It had this much economic impact on the local community. If we restore these areas, we then reach this blue line in which we don't get anywhere near those kind of low points in the dam level. This NBS program here reclaimed 8.6 million cubic meters, so 8.6 hectometers or billion liters, depending on the unit you want to use, but that's a lot of water. And again, here an economic analysis was done comparing those costs. So that's managing the program, clearing those invasive plants and the grazing practices, and then the benefits there. Here again, we can see the key benefit was actual water, but also carbon and poverty alleviation as well. That was something was mentioned before, motivating local communities. One of the main ways to motivate a community can be to involve them in the actual delivery of the program. So here where we're talking about grazing practices, improved grazing, improving agricultural practices, local communities can A, be paid directly to deliver some of these things, and B, they can derive a benefit from actually being part of the delivery of those NBS. Okay, I'll hand over here to Lyndon to talk us through Washington, and then from Lyndon straight to Ben.
Great. So the example I'm going to be speaking to is from the state of Washington in the Northwest United States. The key beneficiaries and partners are the State Department of Ecology, cities and towns. So it is, both rural and urban areas, farmers. So the impacts on agriculture and indigenous peoples, tribal nations within this region are critical partners and stakeholders in this effort. So the key challenges the program seeks to address is flooding of urban and rural communities. And that's really kind of the lead of the program, is to reduce risk from flooding. Washington is in a region of the United States where the impacts of climate change are going to be higher, increased temperatures and increased precipitation, which means more will be falling as rain and there'll be less snowpack. So the impacts of flooding are going to be more severe over time. It also seeks to address habitat loss and ensuring reduced or beneficial economic impacts to municipalities and farmers. So really kind of key metrics they're looking at are avoided flood damages, economic activity generated from the activities, and restoring floodplain and habitat. Priority co-benefits, again, local jobs. Fish passage is really a key one for the tribal nations. This is an area where there's really historic salmon runs that have been severely depleted due to a lot of dams and other impacts to river systems in the region. So in addition to being really important culturally to tribal nations there and indigenous peoples, it's important to their local economies as well. And then also recreation and agriculture. So the program is floodplains by design. It's about 10 years old. And you can see this is a map of where projects have occurred across the state. It's a public-private partnership, again, working to reduce flood risk and restore habitat across the state along rivers and streams. And it takes an integrated floodplain management approach. So really trying to restore historic floodplains and historic flows of the river to reduce flooding, improve habitat, and just make sure that communities are out of harm's way from these climate impacts. And you can also see a lot of the projects are in the western part of the state where it's more mountainous and water rich. So those are going to be the areas that see more extreme flooding now and in the future. So this is just one of the projects. You can see the list of kind of different components that are incorporated into these different projects, where it's restoring a historic oxbow or a historic channel of the river to allow the water more chance to flow and reduce downstream flood risk to a tribal village located near the outfall. So there's also some gray infrastructure. You can see there's a berm rehabilitation that's being done, but for the most part, this is really, nature-based solutions by restoring that historic floodplain to reduce risk to a tribal village. And this is just kind of a high-level overview of the governance structure of this program. So you can see core to this is an NGO backbone, which includes the Nature Conservancy, and that NGO backbone is a key kind of intermediary between the policymakers and the state's Department of Ecology, which runs the program, and then local and tribal leaders. So there's a lot of flow of information that runs through the NGO backbone. So both informing policies that are set by state government based on what they're hearing at the local level from local and tribal leaders, and also ensuring that local and tribal leaders can access the funding that's coming from above. So these are just some high-level impacts to date. Since 2013, when the program was initiated, the state legislature has appropriated $280 million to support these large-scale multi-benefit projects across the state. It saved communities nearly $2 billion in recovery costs or damages avoided from flooding. And for every 1 million invested in the program, there's been 2.2 to 2.5 million in total economic activity that's being generated. Roughly 80% of it staying within the local area of the project. I'll pass it over to.
Thanks, Lyndon. So earlier we heard about the importance of changing mindsets and how do you actually get the key decision makers to be able to shift the way that they think about NBS. So I'd like to use Australia to talk about our experience in terms of how our mindset has changed in terms of the bringing NBS into a key part of how the city is planned and delivered and operated. And then I'd like to use the ancient city of Kunshan in China to be able to talk about how can it be implemented. So first, why did we change our mindsets? And then secondly, how can it be implemented? And tomorrow we'll look at some more examples of very different cities, again, illustrating how the flexibility of NBS means that it can be applied to a very significant array of urban settings. So to Australia, Australia is one of the most urbanised cities in the world. About 80% of our population live in cities. And in particular, Melbourne is our largest city. So, and prior to our Millennium Drought, it was consistently rated as as the world's most livable city, according to The Economist. So, and we're a coastal people, and water is an intrinsic part of our everyday lives. But the Millennium had a significant impact on the way we manage and think about our water resources. Here you can see that the rainfalls, the map shows the rainfalls across the country. And normally for us, a drought lasts for about 2 years. This one lasted for 13. So normally we plan our infrastructure to deal with a 1 in 100 year event. This was for Melbourne, the area down the bottom here, it was a 1 in 500 year event. So it was completely outside our normal planning horizon, and it needed some different ways of thinking. At that time, I was responsible for planning the water supply for Melbourne Water down here. So, you know, it was pretty I had a full head of hair at the start of the period, so it was pretty stressful. But we also changed the way we thought about things because we had to. Because not only down at that time down here, not only did we have this long protracted drought, we also had very dry conditions, lots of fuel load for forest fires, lots of high temperatures, lots of winds, and we had our worst forest fire on record. 192 people lost their lives, and there was significant property damage. This picture here shows the car park of an upgraded treatment plant that was just finished to respond to drought, and we've got forest fire knocking on the door of that treatment plant. At the same time, we also had flooding within the heart of the city. This shows the Yarra River, the river that flows through. So a protracted period of dry, peak periods of flows. So how do we have a city that is resilient to a whole bunch of different types of extreme weather events? I can show you some other examples maybe over the coming days of how the infrastructure that was built for drought either helped us respond to flood or was actually damaged by subsequent floods. So the opportunities and risks of not thinking about all hazards when we're doing our infrastructure planning. At the same time, we had to do some significant infrastructure investment. We're also in the middle of a global financial crisis. So the cost of the traditional grey infrastructure was very significant. And in Melbourne, we had an extra 1 million people arrive a lot quicker than we thought. So significant increase in population, significant decrease in the available water to meet their needs. So, and as we've already said today, conventional grey infrastructure is a key part of urban development going forward. And for Melbourne, it was certainly a significant issue. We had a range of big infrastructure investments, over $4 billion worth of investment during the period. That included construction of the largest desalination plant in the Southern Hemisphere. It included the upgrade to the treatment plant that I talked about earlier at Tarago. It included an upgrading to our second largest sewage treatment plant to tertiary level so that we could recycle more of our waste and take the pressure off our drinking water. It also included a large pipeline, a 70-kilometre pipeline over our Great Dividing Range to transfer water from one basin to another. And in that basin, there was the city invested in agricultural upgrades and was sharing it. So a third of the savings went to the city, a third of those water savings went to the environment, and a third went to the farmers. Interestingly, so a really comprehensive integrated plan of big grey infrastructure. But the time taken to plan, finance and construct the desalination plant meant that the drought had finished by the time it was operational. This pipeline was a fantastic idea and it was built. That's actually the Minister for Water sitting in the cab of the, so everyone was involved, including our decision makers. It was a great project. It's been built and it's never been turned on because of the politics of transferring water from one basin to another. So I guess my point is that big infrastructure solutions continue to be an important part of our infrastructure mix, and these investments will set us, make us more resilient for the next drought, but they alone won't be enough. Big investment, our asset values doubled, our prices doubled in Melbourne and in the rest of the country. So these same trends in Melbourne are happening in the rest of the country. But more fundamentally, there was a shift in the way that we managed our water, our strategy around water resource management. Previously, this pink line shows that we relied on increasing the size of our dams, adding more dams further and further away as storage so that they could get us through a variable climate. But when it doesn't rain, dams aren't much good. Oh, sorry, the other point just briefly was, I mentioned that, can I go backwards? Yeah, I mentioned that an extra 1 million people came to Melbourne, but our demand stayed flat. So per capita use significantly decreased, sorry, I'll note that this is our storage levels. This is what our storage levels would have been without demand management. So on at least 2 occasions, we would have run out of water. Demand management, really important part of the mix, but it had a significant impact on our environment. Our heritage, we lost many of our heritage trees, biodiversity suffered. A lot of the things that made Melbourne the world's most livable city was lost. So I guess we also were saying, well, what else do we have? And this graph shows the amount of water that is supplied to some of our major cities, including Melbourne, the amount of water that is supplied from our dams from outside the city, and the amount of water that falls inside the city from stormwater. So there's been a shift in our thinking to think about the city as a water supply catchment. We could almost double the amount of water available by harvesting more of stormwater. Same story in other countries in very different parts of the country, from the tropics to the desert area and the temperate zone. And I guess the thing that we have learned is that by doing that and bringing nature in through water-sensitive urban design or SUDs or nature-based solutions, whatever you want to call them, we can not only diversify our water supply, but we can also create places that are cool, that are vibrant, that involve and engage the community, that bring the ecosystems that were lost during the drought back into the city and build resilience for the next one. And just briefly, I guess this picture is, we'll let you study it at your leisure at a different time, but what it shows is that the list of water supply options for Australia, this is a survey of 50 water utilities across the country, showing that, yeah, I'll keep moving, showing that the cheapest one for future water supply sources is demand management, but there are a range of other ones considered. And on average is the black dot. The highs and lows of the different options are in the blue, and it illustrates that there is no one solution. The cost of different supply sources varies significantly from one place to another, and you need to think about how you do that. And I guess finally, this is some research that basically says the things that are driving a lot of our planning now is thinking about all supply sources, thinking about unlocking ecosystem services, and thinking about how communities can become not just a passive recipient of water, but an active participant in how their water resources are planned and managed, and how we respond to not only drought, but fire and floods in a more effective way. And what we can do when we think about those things is not repeat the process that has happened around the world, where cities first think, where does our water come from? Then they think we've got a sanitation problem. Then they think about drainage. Can we actually think about it a connected water cycle? And can we get better integration of water into the broader urban planning framework. So that's Mel, and it is possible to leapfrog. And I'm now going to show you an example of where that was. And I think we'll skip the video just in the interest of time, where we go to Kunshan in China. So Kunshan is an ancient city. It is located about 50 kilometres northwest of Shanghai. It is a water city, so it has about 1,000 kilometres of channels. About 25% of its area is water. So water is an integral part of it, and it has been managed through traditional measures for a long, long time, but they have a number of challenges. Pollution and poor circulation is impacting the quality of the water in the city. There is also flooding. They receive their water supply from the Yangtze River, and it has to be pumped a long way. So anything that they can do to use more water locally will generate significant savings from pumping. Through a collaboration between the Australian government and a number of different Kunshan ministries, sorry, just trying to change, we've been able to build around 300 projects, large and small. And the same basic idea has sat behind a lot of those projects, whereby we improve water quality and help manage floods by intercepting water and using green infrastructure to improve the quality of that water and detain it before it finds its way into the canals, that 1,000 kilometres of canals. But there's also using local parks and precinct scale wetlands to not only get the benefits of improved ecosystem, but do some filtration and detention, and then that water is returned back to the canal. So by taking water out, we create space for the floods, and by putting better water quality back, we create a resource that is available for reuse for non-drinking purposes. So this sort of circular flow, making the most of the water that we have, protecting flood and improving quality. That, like I said, that has been applied to around 300 projects, an investment program of around over $200 million. And there's another $1 billion of capital works that are planned for this particular city. It includes very large infrastructure projects like this 40-kilometre ring road around the outside. This project started off as a road, one big grey asset doing one job. It's now a multifunctional corridor that brings nature back in to provide different forms of transport for people, plants and animals. It sits next to a blue asset that conveys water, but this green infrastructure also improves the quality of that water, creating options for downstream agriculture. So we've gone from a big investment in grey infrastructure doing one job to a multifunctional corridor delivering many jobs. That same thinking has been applied to a 38-kilometre high-speed rail project that's now being developed. Large parks like this one, where previously it was a large stagnant pond, and we're now moving water around to improve its quality. There was a former waste dump that we have a video of that's been turned into a park, so it's making the most of the land. I guess the key thing to note, though, is that it's thinking about nature-based solutions at different scales in a flexible and integrated way. So we worked with the local design institutes, the Bureau of Planning and the Bureau of Housing, and then later the Bureau of Gardens and the Bureau of Construction also came into this partnership, all the different players in the urban form, design and delivery, to work on very small scale modular things that can be dropped into a particular location or integrated even into things like urban furniture, precinct scale things that can deliver value to a particular area or whole of city scale. There's also what we call a sponge city brain that looks at the movement of water through the different polders to optimise for water flow and water quality, also helping to manage costs. And I guess just briefly, we heard about the importance of decision makers and the mayor. A key part in this process was that there was a small pilot at a civic centre that had two lakes, one with NBS and one without. The mayor came along, one was clean, the other one was full of algae, and that sort of gave us the permission to do some small scale projects, which over a 10-year period have been scaled up. So we started very small with pilots in a way that built local confidence, local trust, local capacity. And over time, those pilots have got bigger and bigger until they're a connected network of NBS. And the international team have stepped further and further back as local design institutes, local universities local municipalities actually have the capacity and confidence to apply these things at scale. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben and Lyndon, for those case studies there. So if we could ask you to reopen your Menti links, that's menti.com. If you enter that first code at the top there, you'll be able to rank these 6 case studies along a couple of axes. How compelling were they to you? And how surprising did you find them? And after some of the answers come in, we'll be able to flash that up on the screen, and then we'll park here for any brief kind of Q&A before we move into the second half of this session. We are slightly over time, so we might compress this Q&A so we can have more time for the one at the end. Okay, we'll give you an extra final 30 seconds to respond. Oh, so if we move the cursor, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. As more responses come through, the kind of bubbles shift around. What's really interesting here to me is that many of these programs are coming around the middle. I guess to me, that highlights the diversity of these different examples and the different people we have in the audience. Some of them will be more compelling to some of you than others, depending on how similar they are maybe to the challenges you're coming across in your project or you've come across in the past. It's great to see some strong feedback for the urban examples there again from Ben. And I will promise not to tell our colleagues in the UK about Norfolk if it comes last in the ranking. For any extra credit points, does anyone in the room or online feel like sharing about maybe the project they found the most compelling and why? Do we have any comments from the Zoom? Okay. Okay, hand up for the back, please.
Is there any meaning to the 4 quadrants? Say if you have like most surprising and most compelling, what would you call that combination for this graph?
For this graph?
Yeah.
That's a great question. The quadrants don't mean anything. I suppose it's a visual tool, but you could characterize something which is very compelling but not very surprising, might be something which has been done many times before. Something which is very surprising but not compelling might be a harebrained scheme. Surprising and compelling, I guess that's the kind of sweet spot if you can convince stakeholders to come along with you. So you might argue that being lower down the y-axis is better because you have less convincing to do. But it depends on your local context, I suppose. But in direct response, there's no specific meaning to the quadrants. That's just to help visualize. Okay. If we can shift back to the slides. Great, thank you. And as a reminder, there's the code there again for your submission of questions, so we can do the voting at the end. We will try to use that system. Like I said, if we have some technical issue, we'll go back to mics, but that should be a good way to have the people online and in person see the same set of questions. So we're jumping now into some key considerations for nature-based solutions at scale. So there's a few reasons why we think it's important to think programmatically about nature-based solutions. What we mean by that is not just a pilot here or a pilot there in a disconnected way, but thinking about lots of different ways of using nature as a combined program. And it might include, for example, different parts of an urban area, or maybe a program which includes rural areas and urban areas together in the same holistic watershed strategy. That slide we saw with Brooke earlier, with the map of the watershed, the area in which rain falls and flows, that's all one system. So thinking across that whole area can be really useful from a cost benefit and efficiency perspective too. NBS often need to be delivered at scale to deliver meaningful impacts. So that example we had before of Kruger to canyons in South Africa, where our main challenge there is water supply. If we clear invasive trees on a 10-hectare plot, it's very unlikely to have a meaningful impact. 100 hectares, maybe we're getting somewhere 1,000 or 10,000. Now we're getting to the impact which is necessary to motivate that funding. So it's important when we're thinking about NBS to think big, and that doesn't necessarily mean one 10,000 acre NBS. It might be several different NBSs happening in different places in the watershed in different parts of the city. But thinking about scale in these programs is really key to motivate these stakeholders. Several technical and social viewpoints to design and implement NBS. This came up before, thinking about local communities, thinking about local government, thinking about regional government, water managers, communities in upstream areas, communities in downstream areas, scientists, engineers. Often we need a lot of different viewpoints when we're designing these NBS, and it's important to hear from a range of voices. NBS usually requires long-term maintenance and management in the same way that when you're constructing a bridge or a dam, there is some long-term management and maintenance cost. It's the same deal with nature. And it's very difficult to deliver that effectively if you're not thinking programmatically. Lots of pilots might get done, managed for 3, 4, or 5 years, and then the team moves on. And what that can do is undermine your case over the long term for delivering nature-based solutions. And finally, trust, motivation, and funding. This kind of ties to the viewpoints item there, number 2. In order to convince people that NBS is a good idea and that we should incorporate it into our projects, involving those people early on is really key to build that trust and to make sure that if they have key questions, we are able to answer those questions in the technical analysis and the design that we do. For all of these reasons, it's important to think programmatically about NBS. But we can also be flexible. Each watershed, each city is different, and the way that you deliver nature-based solutions and the types of nature-based solutions that you deliver are inevitably different in response to that local context. So different types of sponsor, you might have different branches of government, river basin authorities, maybe transboundary river basin authorities, depending on where you are, water users themselves, development finance institutions like ADB and NGOs. There are lots of different organizations that can promote and sponsor and maybe even host one of these programs. In the middle there, we're thinking about governance. There are some places, for example, NMSD, that's Milwaukee in the US, where the water utility runs its own nature-based solutions program, and it owns land and it pays farmers to do things itself. There are umbrella agreements which might happen, for example, in the Rio Grande in New Mexico, where you have many different organizations contributing to a shared vision, including funders like development banks, but also tribal nations there, different municipal governments, some private businesses. Dedicated vehicles are another option. So that might be establishing a local NGO or establishing an LLC within a government department whose sole purpose is to deliver this NBS program. And on the right-hand side there, funding sources. This was touched on before about stacking beneficiaries. So there might be a government beneficiary. In the Norfolk example, we talked about unlocking development and human health as well. You might have water users, the Cape Town or the Kruger to Canyons example with those agricultural users as well, thinking about how can we get more water for them. Development finance institutions like yourselves, different philanthropic donors, particularly if those people are based in or nearby or have some sort of connection to this area. Financial markets as well, things like carbon and biodiversity credits too. So another question to the group here. Let's hypothesize that you're wanting to set up a program like this to deliver NBS. What might be the key things you keep in mind when setting up that program? And there were some clues to the answer to this on a previous slide, so testing your memory as well. We've got stakeholder needs from the room. Thank you. Perfect. So those the first two speech bubbles we have are about stakeholder needs. We're thinking about downstream stakeholders and beneficiaries. So we can think about those as the people receiving the water, and also upstream areas. So that might be within a city or thinking on a watershed scale. It's not just about the area receiving the water, but also about the area supplying the water. We care about governance and resource management organizations. If you don't consult people in early enough, it can be very difficult to build that trust later. So important to knock on doors and try and drive some trust early on. Thinking long-term, Ben mentioned this in his presentation about Australia, where some of these grey infrastructure solutions were fantastic, but their answers to long-term challenges. We should maintain that long-term focus as well with the nature-based solutions. Quantifying and reporting. Often people providing funding care about what they're getting for that money. So it's important to think about quantification and build that into their long-term management of these programs as well. Using best available science and modeling, often local research institutes, universities, etc., can be best placed, not only to support with the design of these programs, but also as the long-term host of that monitoring that's going on. So that, as was mentioned earlier, the international team can more easily, with more confidence, kind of hand off to those local organizations. And finally, being adaptable and flexible. So we saw in that previous slide, all of the different ways that this can work effectively. And it's important to be nimble, particularly early on when we're considering one of these programs. So the way that we think about setting up nature-based solutions at a watershed scale follows the same kind of program preparation and then implementation lifetime that you might think about with a traditional grey infrastructure solution. So in our pre-feasibility, we might be trying to understand the watershed. So what's going on? What are the systems happening in this area? How do they interact? What's land use? What's happening with climate? Then we might think about a cost-effective portfolio. So portfolio, that means which nature-based solutions are we doing and where? Cost-effective is how much will it cost to do those NBS and what is the benefit of those? So we touched on this briefly with the Brazil example earlier with that mapping of the sediment discharge and the different areas where we can prioritize those activities based on that. Next, design. So how are we going to practically implement these activities? We want to do 10,000 hectares of tree control. Okay, practically, what does that entail? Do we need to train local people? What machinery do we need? What's the topography of those areas? Do we have decent access roads? It's really important to think practically about these things before people actually get boots on the ground. And finally, once we have a program executing, how do we scale up and report and build adaptive management in so we can make sure that we're responding to emerging challenges as we go? So for the sake of time, I'll give you the answers to this one. what questions might you ask yourself analyzing a watershed? So how does the watershed behave and how might this change? Climate has come up a few times so far. Just because we're fed by snowmelt today in this diagram on the left, maybe that snowmelt will change. Probably we're going to have less of it, but maybe we'll have more of it, or it's going to be more lumpy in its arrival. How are different parts of the watershed connected? If we build an irrigation canal or a dike in one area, maybe that's going to change flooding in a different area or affect an ecosystem. What are the main water users? Human, but also natural. Is there a big natural park or a particular wetland which is used by migratory birds, for example? Those water users, albeit non-human, are really critical in understanding the watershed. What activities might be relevant here? Not just based on what we can see or what's been done before, but also based on case study examples we have in other places, other parts of the world with similar contexts. And how is the resource itself governed? So who decides where water goes? What is the infrastructure for that? Who's paying and how much and to whom? These are all really important things to consider, both at a watershed scale, in rural areas, but also within an urban environment too. Who's making those zoning decisions, for example, and who's owns the land that we want to build or build next to. We won't go into this today, but to touch on a treat for tomorrow, we will go into some of the examples of how you might assess nature-based solutions. So how might you analyze cost benefit and then prioritize based on those results? All the way through from on the far left, identifying our options, and then all the rights, actually valuing those benefits. We're going to skip a couple of slides today to have more time for discussion. So as a brief recap before we go to the discussion portion, it's often necessary to think programmatically about NBS, and there are a range of different ways we think that can be delivered. The first is understanding challenges and the drivers of those challenges. Just because something is happening today, it might not happen in the future, or maybe it will get worse. And it's really important that that's the understanding both within the team and also with the key stakeholders that need to be convinced to fund, activate, and deliver the activities which are happening. Approaching things holistically and with an interdisciplinary approach is really important, using a wide range of experts technically, but also people who know the local government, who are involved in decision-making, who are the local communities in your areas. As was touched on before, many of these NBS we talk about have been delivered by these local communities for hundreds or even thousands of years. So how do we involve those voices as well? Underscoring programs with the impact goals and objectives. So if we're delivering invasive tree control to improve water quantity, because that's what our stakeholders care about, that should be a really key thread that runs through all of the decisions that we make in the program. Thinking about long-term funding and program structure. We've touched on the importance of that and the different flexible options as well. And finally, then each context is different. So these examples are compelling and surprising in different ways. And it may be that parts of them are relevant for the example programs we have in the room today and online, but perhaps such contexts are totally different. So we need to think more flexibly again. Okay, I think hopefully we can go back to Menti now and we'll have some questions on there. We'll give you another couple of minutes to submit more questions through Menti, and then we'll hit next within the Menti in a couple of minutes' time, and you'll be able to upvote your favorite questions. Okay, Menti should be open. Okay, we'll give you another 2 minutes to submit questions and then we'll go to voting. And as a warning, once we go to voting, you won't be able to submit any more questions. Okay, hopefully now you'll see the option to vote on the questions. We'll give you a couple of minutes for that. Okay. All right, let's go to show voting results. Okay, fantastic. We'll go from the top down the bottom. We're almost at time for the session, but we had some office hours we were going to do after this. So perhaps we should run through these responses and continue. Yeah. Okay, question 1. Are there NBS solutions that failed? What were the contributing factors? Any responses from the trainers group, or would you like me to take that one? We got Michael. Okay, we've got a response from Brooke.
Yes, there have been MBS solutions that failed. Primarily, I would say because there was lack of coordination among multiple stakeholders. So everyone's kind of doing their own thing individually, but there's no coordinated mechanism between them. And so then they were all kind of operating at this pilot scale rather than actually operating in any sort of mechanism at a scale that would actually make a difference to the challenges that they were trying to address. And because of this sort of lack of coordination, they were unable to build the solid track record that would allow them to attract larger buckets of funding. So they were always getting these small kind of piecemeal dollar amounts versus a large kind of programmatic bucket. And so there's some that I can think of in Colorado that failed. There was another that was primarily targeting like a ski hill, very popular ski hill in Montana called Big White. There's many kind of instances, and we can talk about some of the intricacies, but for the sake of time, I'll leave it there.
Just from an urban perspective, yeah, lots have failed. And the sad thing is you can do like 10 really good projects and one bad one, and everyone talks about the bad one. And probably the key reason that these things have failed is that they have tried to apply a cookie cutter approach, taken a piece of a technology from one place and plopped it into the other. And that there's some research showing that in the Sponge City examples in China, where have been place-based application, it's been great, and where it's been this sort of cookie cutter approach, it hasn't worked as well. And the other key ones in Australia is that we have underestimated the maintenance cost because we didn't do the research about what that cost was going to be. And secondly, there was not clarity who was going to own the asset when it was finished. So it ended and it didn't look very good or didn't work.
Sure, I'll give another practical example from a rural case in Argentina, where we had some high altitude wetlands which were being degraded, and these wetlands play a really important role in storing snowmelt in the spring and then discharging that down in the summer, which is when the agricultural users need the most of the water. What happened there was a local community wasn't involved, and very quickly the international team came in, funded a bunch of fencing around the wetland. The international team go away, and what the community do is go around the fencing or remove the fencing and take their animals into the wetland to graze and to drink the water there. Or people who are running mules around the mountains kind of make new tracks, which ends up causing problems in other areas because the communities weren't consulted. So there's another example of coordination failure. Second question, how to engage private sector or investment in NBS? The first driver there is to identify what the private sector cares about in your context. If they have a water shortage issue, maybe because urban or civilian water use is prioritized above the private sector. The private sector is the first loser if there's a water shortage. So maybe there's a story around restoring nature, improving water supply will reduce the amount of times your plant gets shut off. Maybe the private sector has some sort of water quality discharge target they have to achieve before they can send water back into the waterways. Nature can resolve that challenge for them too. Maybe there's a social expectation on the private sector, or maybe they're doing some insetting or offsetting of their carbon or biodiversity impact. But the first thrust, I think, is to try and understand what that private sector organization cares about. And then in your NBS program, how are you going to quantify the way that you're addressing that benefit? It's unlikely that the private sector will pay 100% of the cost of one of these programs. And even if they could, you don't necessarily want to be led by the private sector, because that company that organization might change its priority next year, and suddenly your project runs out of maintenance funding. But involving the private sector as one of your beneficiaries in that beneficiary stack can really help reduce the load on some of the other stakeholders. But welcome any other thoughts from the team. Okay, we have thumbs ups. I'll hand this one to Ben and Lyndon. We kind of mentioned this one earlier, but lots of NBS require green space, which can be scarce or expensive. How to resolve this?
Yeah, this is definitely a challenge that's pretty common with integrating NBS in the urban environment. I can start, and then Ben, I'm sure you'll have some things to add too. But I guess one of the things looking from like a regulatory perspective is if any regulations or policies could be adapted to better integrate NBS. I know there was the comment earlier about just some high level policy, not even having that language in there, whatever language is needed that speaks to the NBS. I think in a local context from the US, there's just since land is it's a highly dense urban areas, you have to think about, are there any policies that are conflicting? So like land use policies, for example, around parking, where I live in Philadelphia, there's certain landscaping requirements, but you couldn't use green infrastructure practices to actually meet those landscaping requirements. So it's like both were required, whereas like green infrastructure, there's the opportunity to integrate it and actually have it meet some of those policies around landscape design. So I would say that's just like one consideration. And then I don't know, Ben, if you want to add some things. Okay.
Okay, we'll go to the next one. What tools or methods do you suggest to monitor the effectiveness of NBS? Maybe I'll start and then hand to the team. It depends on the NBS and it depends on what you're monitoring. If you're monitoring improved water supply because of clearing invasive trees, then you're talking about paired catchments where you identify a couple of areas with a similar level of invasion. You control those invasive plants in one of your areas, and then with some flow monitors, you might say how much water is flowing out of these catchments. It's going to be very different if you're talking about groundwater recharge on farms. Then maybe it's how much water flows into my wetland, how much water flows out, how much do I think the evaporation is, and the remainder is recharge or infiltration. If you're talking about an NBS in an urban context, I suppose it's very different again. So I don't think there's one size fits all. It also depends on what your stakeholders care about, because those are the things you should be monitoring. I think a lot of data is collected, which doesn't end up being used. And sometimes the data which is needed isn't collected. So I define my response to that based on the particular NBS in question and what the objectives are of that. A thumbs up. Let's do one more.
Just a little comment. These are very good questions. I don't think we can answer them all now, but those are questions that we can carry out through the next days. Through your presentations, I think you would touch some of those topics to provide more context and provide the answers for those questions. So I think it's good to keep those questions in mind as we go through the next days of lectures and clinics.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah. Should we jump back to the slides? And those of you in the clinic sessions this afternoon, of course, we can go into some of those as well. Okay. A big thank you. I think here I'm handing back to Isao.
Thank you, Eric, and our experts, Brooke, Lyndon, and Ben, for your excellent lectures, as well as great moderation. That was really helpful. Thank you. I also like to thank everyone who is participating in this session, for your active interaction. Questions and comments are very helpful. Thank you.